Welcome to the Penny for Your Thoughts podcast. This is your weekly insight into the small businesses of London. Today we're talking to Vince Dickson, who is the co-founder of HUNU. HUNU is a collapsible, reusable coffee cup, and we are going to be talking to Vince about how you can build the best product possible. All right, Vince, well, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here. Yeah.
All the way from New York. So, HUNU, your tagline is small cup, big impact. Do you want to explain that for us a little bit? What's HUNU all about?
So actually, the tag that was kind of the description we used early days, which it is kind of the philosophy we go for. But really, the tagline is more we have this idea of go again, and I'll probably kind of get to that. But really, the small cup, big impact is kind of what it says. Like the idea is we launched the product because we saw a gap for something we'd use. So for anyone who's listening and doesn't know, HUNU is a collapsible cup. So it's something you kind of can put in your pocket and carry around and use day to day. We launched it just with disposable coffee cups in mind. Like kind of living in New York and places like London, you go around all day and you use these kind of coffee cups. And I drink pretty small coffee, so I would literally use a cup for sometimes seconds. Like you'd have 4 sips and the thing's gone and you throw it in a bin. And it was just crazy to me that there wasn't a solution that I actually could carry around with me, because everything that's out there just seemed to be kind of really product based or feature based. It was all keep it cold and keep it warm. And you're like, I actually just want something to use for those 5 minutes and that I can always have with me. So the idea was just, we went 100% for convenience. Like, how can we're not competing with other use cases of like thermos cups or anything. We're competing with disposable cups. Like, what is a better version of a coffee cup? It's something that's reusable, and it's something that is almost or just as convenient as the disposable cup. So the idea with that was this product that could really have impact on its own. But really, the minute we got into the product and the brand, we realized that even our own use coming from I've always been aware of the sort of sustainability angle in the world. Both Megs and myself are founded it, spend a lot of time in the outdoors. So you kind of, you know, the impacts of stuff. I've seen plastic in some pretty remote places of the world. So you're aware of the impact, but it didn't really filter into our day-to-day life. And I think the minute I sort of looked at this product and we started using it, I suddenly became aware of all the other stuff I was doing. There was the kind of takeout containers and like where your electricity comes from, and just all of you're like, oh, that just opened my eyes immediately. It was kind of this gateway drug to all these other assets of my life that were maybe I was kind of could improve a little bit and make it a bit cleaner, if for lack of a better word. And I think that's where the kind of small cup, big impact came about. Is obviously the idea is primarily use this cup, you use less single-use products, but also it's this idea of, well, just by using something easy and convenient daily and having something that's easy to use daily, it maybe kind of opens that door in your head of becoming aware of other stuff that you slowly take action on. And I think the idea is not to be, we always push is not to be perfect. It's just to kind of do something and allow that to trigger other actions. And I think it then becomes just your whole sort of framework shifts a little bit. And over time, you realize that actually you're a lot more conscious of your decisions and your buying decisions, and even to the quality of the products you buy and how sort of fast fashion, it all relates to each other. So yeah, so that's the first step. Sorry, I'm long-winded way of describing that. But really, the what we base the brand on and the idea is we never want to be a kind of holier than thou sustainability reusable product brand. The tagline we actually kind of use is go again, which is this idea of actually getting out into the world and experiencing it, and really coming from the idea of why are we trying to be sustainable? Why do we use these products? It's because the world is a really beautiful place. You want to be out there experiencing it, and you don't want it to look like shit. Sorry, you don't want it to be messy and disgusting and kind of polluted and destroy it. And I think getting back to like the reasons behind it, and I think that's more our focus is the sustainability, and the impact aspect is a given, but really the goal is to be aware of the world that you want to live in and going out to live in it, and create products that make it easy to do that on both fronts. Be kind of a little cleaner and just get out there without these things getting in your way. I don't know if that answers it fully.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. It's really good to understand that other side of the brand. I do kind of want to talk a little bit about sustainability though. Really interesting for everyone to kind of learn about how you guys source the most sustainable materials in making the cup, because I know you went through quite a few processes with that. Yeah, like how do you find the most sustainable stuff, and why is it important?
Impossible. The most sustainable thing is not to produce anything. That's the baseline. So we try not to look at sustainability as on a too granular level. What we're trying to build is something that overall becomes a net positive impact. And I think materials wise, we are constantly aware of this. We obviously, as a startup, you start day one and you don't know anything. So you kind of do something and you're not going to get it 100% right. But the idea is to constantly be evolving, constantly be monitoring this stuff. So materials wise, we use silicone, which is something that is obviously produced, and it requires kind of products that aren't sustainable products. It's not something that's going to degrade, but it's incredibly durable material. So if you stack it up, if you use a HUNU reusable cup, over time, that is going to pay for itself back pretty quickly compared to disposable cups. So we look at it more on a kind of net basis of what is it removing in terms of the other stuff you use, rather than are we producing something that in itself in a vacuum is 100% sustainable, because that's essentially impossible. It still requires all these resources to produce. And I think as a holistic thing, as we grow, the idea is to create both a brand that kind of creates more awareness of some of these issues and to highlight some of them, but then also as a business, as we grow, being able to put back resources into creating a net positive kind of impact. So there's also obviously carbon is a big issue, and kind of carbon offsets and things like that. So looking at ways we can offset that stuff, and looking at as a business, kind of can we give back to initiatives that maybe impact awareness or just the way people behave. So we were involved with 1% for the Planet, which is the way it's described by our organization is kind of a voluntary environmental tax. So it's every 1% of everything we make, whether we make a profit or a loss, every sale goes towards, we voluntarily give it to organizations of our choosing that are kind of vetted by the 1%. So the organization we've started working with is a surf school, kind of ocean awareness school in South Africa, which is where I'm from. So it's kind of close to what I believe in. And what they do isn't necessarily sustainable, but what they do is bring people from townships and kind of underprivileged backgrounds, and they introduce them to the ocean, and they make them more aware of like the environment and the animals and clean water and all this sort of stuff. And those sort of kids that pass through, they come out of it with a much bigger appreciation of nature and the planet and the reason for this stuff. And I think all of this is the sustainability aspect for us is a much bigger conversation. And I think as a brand, we've been very conscious of not being too preachy on a product level. I think it's fairly easy to sell a product these days because sustainability is a big topic by saying buy this product and save the earth, so, which is just disingenuous at best. There's no product that's manufactured that is genuinely that. But what we can do is really improve the way we produce our product, constantly be looking at materials. And we've learned a lot. So certain things we've learned, like that actually in many ways, certain plastics are actually way more sustainable to put into products than certain maybe more sort of sustainable or new materials, because the impact of producing them is so much less. So there's all these kind of biodegradable things, and all this stuff is amazing, like the research that's going on to the products being made, but they still require a lot of energy to make them. So there's all these nuances to it that we're figuring out as well, of like, it's an easy sell to say, this is made with a biodegradable kind of cornstarch material, and it sort of sounds nice and it's a very easy sell to the public. But actually in the background, you don't mention that it takes a huge amount of energy and output to actually produce that product at the scale it's currently being done. And I think that's what we're trying to figure out, is not being too closed off with how we think of it because of the public perception of certain materials as how things are done. We're trying to look at it as like on a whole basis. Is it maybe the best thing is to produce purely plastic products, and or maybe it's not, and just being very open to kind of actually the nuances of the stuff. And as I say, a lot of that sustainability output is actually supply chain and shipping, and it's not always purely on the product materials basis. But sorry, that was a huge long ramble. It's stuff we think about a lot, so I have a lot to say on the topic. But in terms of how our product's produced, it's basically a silicone cup, and then silicone, as I mentioned, is an incredibly durable material. So the way we look at it kind of at the moment is that it's just something that can be used indefinitely. Really, it'll never break down unless you really abuse it. And then silicone also you can technically recycle. It is quite hard and has to get done through kind of industrial facilities, but there's a lot of stuff we're looking into about repurposing the material, and it's turned into different products and things. So it is something we're constantly kind of monitoring and evolving towards.
I think that's actually a really nice kind of refreshing take on sustainability. It's nice to hear someone talk about it and it not be oppressive and it not make you, feel guilty in any sort of way. And I think that's something that people will be quite pleased to hear, because I think it can be sometimes really daunting to buy from sustainable.
It's a huge part of how we think about it. I feel like the industry, to me, and this is a huge generalization, there's some amazing brands. There's a lot of amazing brands, a lot of amazing people, and a lot of amazing people with really good intentions. I just think the so-called kind of greenwashing it's very easy, because it's very easy to throw buzzwords out, and it's very easy to claim sustainable this, and actually I believe that kind of in the not too distant future, a lot of these brands are going to get caught out, because the claims they're making and the way they're selling their products is people are going to go, wait a second, like you're not lining up with actually how the company's run and what you're doing. And it's actually not that true that this material or this thing is actually as sort of sustainable or environmentally friendly as you think. And I think that's why we're trying to be as open as possible how we do it. We don't know everything. We're trying to figure it out. And as an entire business over time, our goal is to be net positive, and that socially and environmentally, and it's all linked. And then again, more around this concept of like, why are we doing this? It's because the world is amazing. It's positive. It's upbeat. It's not this doom and gloom. Stop using stuff. And I think like there's all these sort of taglines of like, do less, have fun with less. Like it's all about less. It's all about reducing, and which I just don't think that's how life should be lived. I think do more, get out more, but you can be aware of your impact you're having and find ways to play with that, because ultimately we all want a kind of cleaner, better world that's healthier for all of us. And I think not just for humans, but for all life. But we still do live on this planet. We aren't this sort of, I don't think humans are this sort of virus that people like to make out that we're destroying it. It's like we are part of it, whether we like it or not, whether we're not good or bad or evil, we're just here, and we need to find our place and kind of make it as good as possible for everything we interact with. So yeah, as you can hear, it's an ongoing conversation we have. We're definitely not there yet, but it's definitely something we're constantly aware of and trying to build. I'm glad you picked that up, the positivity in the brand. We're trying to focus on the positive aspects rather than kind of the guilt aspects.
Yeah, totally. It really comes across. And the other thing I really want to talk about is design, because again, that is a really key part of your brand and something that makes you guys really stand out, because the design of your cup, it's obviously collapsible. The design of your cup is not just about the look. It would be great to talk through the process of the design, your kind of design ethos, and how you got it to where it is now.
Yeah, no, again, I'm glad you picked it up, because design is a huge part of kind of what we base a lot of our decisions on. So where do I start here? So I suppose I'll start on how we came up with the concept in the first place. It was, as I mentioned before, it was really this idea of having something that could be with us at all times. It was like the thought in my head was like, assuming in some point in the future, all single-use plastics are phased out and there isn't some sort of kind of organic alternative that's figured out to the scale that works, it's going to be pretty normal to carry things we use on a day-to-day basis with us. So the concept was, can we create something that you carry around as easily and as thoughtlessly as your phone or your keys or your wallet, the way we do now? Like, you don't think about those things. You just put them in your pocket and you go about your day because you'll use them during the day. And I think I was like, well, even if it's not, it's useful now. But at some point in the future, I could see a case where actually you have to, otherwise you don't have another option, maybe. So that was really the idea, is coming up with something that was the concept. Can it fit in your pocket and be carried around very seamlessly? So we then spent quite a bit of time just playing on our own, like looking at what's out there, cutting up different materials and gluing them together, and like literally the kind of cliched kitchen table stuff of a startup. And then when we had a sort of better idea of what we thought we wanted, we then sat down and got some designers on board. We worked with a really amazing agency in London. And it was interesting working with product designers, which I haven't done that experience before, is actually they just kind of wiped all of that. And they said, okay, what's the base concept in terms of the design? The base concept is a drinking vessel that is easy to be with you. So then you start from scratch. You go, well, is it a cup? Maybe it's a bag. Maybe it rolls up. Maybe it's made out of like metal. So then you kind of start the whole, and that design process is really, really interesting, having gone through it. And ultimately you come back, because then with design, the one thing is your product. You want it to look good. You want it to be high quality. You want it to work well. But then if you're creating a business out of it, you also need it to be able to be manufactured, and you need to be able to manufacture it at a large scale, and you need to have that manufacturing be efficient. And again, coming back to the sustainability angle, you want it to be as efficient and easy as possible, because you could have amazing features to your product, but if they require a lot of work and time and money and resources, that isn't feasible. So then you sort of have to scale down your vision. You start with this grand thing of like, oh, I could have this and all these bells and whistles, and then you go, well, that's not replicable at large scale. So then you kind of start going, okay, what do we remove from this? And that was, and as I say, this is all stuff. It was a huge learning curve for us, because working with designers who, and specifically kind of product designers and engineers who know about this stuff and are aware of like, oh, I really like that, but it would be very hard to get a mass machine to do that. And ultimately we came down with this really clean, simple version, and got to kind of the materials that we have, the silicone and things like that, because they just do the job really, really well. They're sturdy when they're up, and they're kind of easy to collapse, and they last for a long time. So that's the sort of design process to the product. And I think a lot of that's the actual product itself. So we got to a point where the product was really beautifully functional. It just worked for exactly what we wanted to do. You could put it in your pocket, you could pull it out, you could use it as a cup. It was leak proof. It didn't spill if you had a few drops left over when you folded it down. It was sturdy when it was up. It kind of ticked all these boxes. So that was one aspect. And then the other aspect, and I think, again, this is all credit to our product designers, is the visual aspect. From the beginning, we see HUNU as not just a product brand, but as much more of a kind of lifestyle brand. I think the space we're growing into is, we want it to be kind of an aspirational fashion, streetwear, that sort of aspect of it. Something that people want to, it's an accessory. They want to be included with. They want it to be included in their day. They want to show people it. They want to use it. And I think the Europe and the UK are slightly ahead on this, but in the US and many places, you still feel like the odd one out, pulling out your kind of cup at the coffee shop. And I think I see we're looking at encouraging people to use more reusables in this kind of push-pull approach of creating a product that's frictionless and very convenient to use. So it's just with you, you can pull it out, it's easy to pop up, you fold it back down. But then secondly, this kind of pull approach of a brand that you want to, there's a social signaling aspect of the brand. And so the product design is hugely part of that, where you want to design something that's beautiful and the color range fits in and it works with kind of current styles. And so that's something we're constantly looking at as well, of like, what are latest trends and I think the product we ended up coming out with is definitely kind of the version we have now, is this really clean, beautiful, even to the point of like the finish on the lid is kind of a little more matte than we originally had, and just gives it a slightly more kind of stylish thing. And as we build HUNU, the brand, that's something we're very focused on. It also gives us the ability to partner with other, maybe slightly more aspirational brands and be something that people want to be involved with. So yeah, so as I say, the design is on two fronts. It's very much on the kind of brand and the visual aspects of the product. And then secondly, on actually making it a very functional and quality. That was the other sort of aspect on that I didn't go to in the project, but really making sure the quality is high. And we spent a long time, much longer than you would think, refining the fit of the lid and the plug and the way it folds and the feeling of when it folds and how it snaps together and all these things that you just don't think about it's a cup. It's a pretty simple product, but it months and months of refining like the most minute details. But I think that comes across when you use it. And it just this certain products, I think you mentioned kind of Apple earlier on when we were talking, and they're the same thing, where there's a lot of design features that you don't think about, but the experience of using it is just beautiful. And it's almost that idea of like, you don't think about those experiences of using the product, but it just feels satisfying and it works and does what it's meant to and fits and doesn't kind of let you down. There's very fine margins, the difference between a high quality product and a low quality one. I think we concentrate very hard on that as well.
Yeah, and that totally, as someone that actually uses a HUNU cup, not a paid ad, but as someone that actually uses a HUNU cup, yeah, I agree. You can see the similarities between like a really high quality like Apple product that is really satisfying to use and like the HUNU cup that, like you say, it just kind of collapses down like this and it ends up being this big, and it's just like it fits into your lifestyle really well. Yeah, you really can see it through the design.
I mean, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, I mean, I think that word you used is absolutely sums it up. It's satisfying. Like a good product is more than just like, oh, that works well. There's something like pleasurable about how well it just something fits together, or something snaps, or something you like this. It just, you can feel it. There's something kind of there that you appreciate, and it's hard to describe sometimes until you use a product and you're like, oh wow, it's a very satisfying experience.
Yeah, for sure. Just circling back a little bit to a little bit more of a sort of business based question. Obviously, HUNU has been in the works for a number of years, really, hasn't it? But you guys only launched about a year ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've had a sort of strange trajectory, I suppose. We came up with the idea originally in 2019. Maybe even late 2018. Geez, the years fly by. But really spent a kind of a good amount of time playing with the product and the concept and just sort of seeing what goes. It was very kind of in the background. And then we got to a point sort of 2019. So 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, where we really started getting serious about working on the product design. And it took kind of most of 2019 to do that. So really we launched officially 2020.
Okay.
And even then, it wasn't really an official launch. We went with Kickstarter as a launch pad, and we kind of played around with a bunch of different ideas at the time. But essentially, all we had at the time was a prototype of our product, and obviously kind of aware what it could be, and we knew that we liked it. And then you put it out to the world. And I think anyone who creates a product or is a startup, it's a terrifying moment when you take something that you're like, oh, this is going to be great, and then you're like, well, here it is. Now you guys have to buy it. And maybe no one buys it. And then you kind of back to square one. So we launched beginning of 2020 with this Kickstarter campaign. And luckily, kind of our hunch was right. And people did like the product. And we had really good success with that. And that sort of pushed us forward. But I think our Kickstarter campaign ended in the 5th of March, if I remember right. It was the first week of March, the campaign ended. And I think like the Corona lockdowns kind of whirled the bulk of them. It was everything was happening in Italy, and it seems so long ago to talk about this now. It was crazy how it kind of much has gone on since then. But within a week of our campaign ending, obviously everyone's focus was on kind of COVID, and then everything shut down. So really the bulk of 2020 was then spent, we had this Kickstarter campaign, and the way Kickstarter works is people pre-buy the product. So they're basically paying you in advance, and then you go and make the product. So we spent the rest of 2020 really with not much else going on in the world, I suppose. Supply chains shut down and factories kind of slowing down and all this stuff, just working on getting the product made, which in some ways that probably was a blessing, because rather than being kind of thrown into chaos, we actually had a bit of space to really do it properly and set up relationships with manufacturers in our factory and kind of set up a lot of stuff that really stood us in good stead moving forward. But it meant that we didn't really officially launch the product until late 2020, kind of to the public. And even then, a lot of what we've done since then is really test the market. And this is getting kind of more, I suppose, business stuff and sales stuff, but really we were testing different channels. We put it on Amazon and we looked how it sold, and we launched our very basic version, our website, and everything was very bootstrapped. It was kind of, where can we get in sales from, and where does it appeal? And we started seeing more niches pop up. The sort of outdoor market, people were just using it and it was spreading. And we saw stay-at-home moms, weirdly, was this little niche that popped up, particularly during kind of COVID. They'd go out for a walk and they had the pram and everything, and it was just, they loved it because it was a convenient product that they could use and fold down and throw in the pram with it, especially when everyone was locked down. That was kind of the daily activity, was going for a walk. So all these little things that popped up. So we spent a lot of that time just sort of watching things and really jumping on anything and testing different channels. But a part of that process led us to realizing that there was huge demand for a larger size range. And then we took that opportunity to kind of refine the product as well, use some of the feedback we'd gotten from our first version. So then we spent 2021 refining the product. And really, that new range has launched in the last, really, we've got the stock supply chains. I'm sure you've had these conversations before, chaos at the moment. So we've been hugely delayed on that. So it's taken till early this year, 2022, for us to actually launch with a consistent plan. And we've had kind of really good momentum moving forward, but it's been a lot of like bootstrapping, picking off different bits, testing channels, getting different kind of partnerships set up, and looking at different parts of the world. And now we're in the first place. So really, your question in terms of launch is, we're just launching now officially, actually, if we're honest about it. It's the first time we really consistently have product, and we're opening all the channels and growing them and putting money towards marketing and that sort of stuff. So which is great for us because our foundation has been built out nicely, and it's given us a lot of space, and it's been all organic, which has set us up really nicely in terms of kind of the market we're in.
And do you feel like the sort of last few years have been a natural like learning progression that you've been happy with, or do you wish there was kind of something you knew when you started out that would have kind of solved a few issues that you faced along the way? Like, is there something where you look back and you're like, God, if I knew that, then aside from obviously the pandemic happening, that would be a good one to know. But
no, it's a great question. Yeah, obviously, I think anyone, if you could go back and like know everything you know now, yes, absolutely. Have there's two ways of building a product brand these days. The one is you sort of have an idea and you create the product and you sort of bootstrap it and test it and you learn as you go. The other is you create a product, get some buzz, raise a lot of money, and kind of really accelerate that trajectory and hope that you get to a scale where you start making a profit. And that's what a lot of these kind of big DTC brands the last few years have done well with, is the Facebook ads have been cheap and very effective, and they've scaled brands really well on that and got a lot of funding. I think that route means that you lose contact with the nuts and bolts of it pretty quickly, which isn't a bad thing, because you can bring on the flip side of that, you bring on really talented people and you can hire, and it's obviously a much faster path. But the downside there is maybe you don't have as much insight into the business and actually what's going on in the customer. And I think, to answer your question of like, do I wish I'd known stuff at the beginning? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I could go back and know everything I know now, it would have been a much smoother ride. But on the flip side, those experiences are the only things that forced me to learn stuff, or to forced us as a team to kind of figure out things, or to innovate on the product. Or so it's that age-old thing of like I wouldn't change anything because it got us to where we are now. Mm-hmm. But for sure, there've been a lot of mistakes and a lot of learning experiences. I mean, we started off day one, and I still to this day, but not so much anymore. But definitely at the beginning, I'd have conversations with sort of like distributors that we're talking to, and they'd mention sort of some technical shipping term, and they were like, "Oh, is this FOB or is this?" And I was like, "Shit!" I'm googling like FOB. Oh yeah. And then afterwards, I'd spend like an hour going, "Okay, oh, I didn't know we needed that," or like insurance policies, and so it's a lot of that sort of hacking. And I think anyone who's in a sort of bootstrap startup will know the experience of like you learn stuff when you're forced to learn it, and a lot of the stuff is I wouldn't voluntarily sit down and go through like harmonized shipping codes through like the US government's database of like what different materials attract different taxes. But when you have a form from your importer and they're like, we can't release the goods, we need these figures, and you're like, I don't know what you mean, and you spend the rest of the day, then now you know it. And the next time I have that conversation, you sound a bit smarter and you kind of know what you're doing. So I think the I don't think you can remove those learning experiences. I think as a startup that kind of bootstraps and being a founder who's involved in all aspects of it, you're forced to learn them. And I think overall, I'm a believer that stands you in really good stead. Even to the point of like, once you start really filling in those positions and hiring, you know what you're talking about, and someone you kind of, I think that's a really important thing. So always good to know more. And I'm sure in a year's time, I will think again, like, oh, I wish I'd known this. And in 10 years time, the same thing. But that is the experience. I don't think you can take one without the other.
Yeah, for sure. We've actually had a similar answer more than once on the podcast about learning the horrific logistics side of things. Is something that no one ever wants to do, but once you know it, it's great. And
it's when you have no choice. It's like that sort of when you're at school and you had to turn in like an essay and it was midnight and you hadn't done it. Like you're like, shit, there's no procrastinate. I just can't escape this anymore. And I think it's the same thing with a startup. It's like it's Saturday night and you'd rather be doing something else, but you know that Monday morning so you just have to. There's no choice. And but it's ultimately incredibly satisfying because you suddenly turn around one day and you're like, oh, actually I'm pretty knowledgeable on this like really niche area of sales or shipping or kind of retailer experiences or like whatever it might be. It's these really arbitrary pieces of knowledge and systems that kind of I enjoy it now, knowing that I know them.
Okay, and I'm actually just going to move us around to the final question now, which is one that is always left by the previous guest. It's actually quite a fun question. The previous guest wants to know, if you were given £1 million, or I guess dollars in HUNU's case, you were given $1 million in funding to spend on whatever you wanted, what would it go towards for HUNU?
I mean, I can answer this one pretty easily because we're currently raising. So I know what this would go to. I think right now as I mentioned, we sort of really feel like we're officially launching. So a lot of what we've done up to this point has been sort of testing and very, very lean. And now we're at a point where we know what works. We know what the foundation is. We know kind of channels, and we know basically where we can scale things. So the money currently we're looking to get in will allow us to hire people. I'm looking to expand the team pretty fast. Bring on a lot more kind of knowledgeable people in key areas, and then put towards marketing budgets. And I think as a brand, we are looking to be much more of a media brand in terms of how we market rather than kind of a PPC scale that up. We want to start developing really interesting, engaging content and build a HUNU brand. So money right now, I think I'm going to change your question. I'm going to say if I got 10 million right now, and it was way more than I needed for the operational stuff, I would build a media side of HUNU. If I had money that was like I had to spend and it was just burn and it wasn't just for standard growth things that obviously you can always spend more money on, I would build a media side, and I would bring in, I really see what we're doing as building a kind of media business around what we do. So I would bring in creatives and writers, and I think that's where we're looking at things long term, and then building the business off the back of that, or the products off the back of that. So yeah, it would allow us to kind of accelerate the brand growth as much as anything.
Oh, so exciting. It's exciting that you're fundraising. All the best of luck with that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a whole nother part of being a founder that I'm learning about quickly.
Yeah, that's the thing that you'll be looking back in a year's time on. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation.
No, nice. Yeah, it was good. Thank you.